wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no kwa Osinachi. One man Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, mama Osinachi.
Àní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no kwa Osinachi. One man Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, mama Osinachi.
Good evening, everyone. We'll just wait a few minutes for others to join us and then we'll commence. We'll give them 2 minutes and then we can start.
Are we live?
Yes, we are. We're live streaming. I think we can start now. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And you're welcome to this first panel session on the Gender and Academy, which is a mentoring session of women, of senior female academics in the LSA, supporting female early career researchers in the network. And the work we've been doing over the years is to have frank conversations around the issues that affect women, particularly in the academy, as well as supporting early career researchers in navigating their career. Today's panel is on the topic invisible labor, as well as preserving and expanding the pipeline for women in research careers. And the speakers for today are 4 mentors. We have Professor Judith Byfield from Cornell University. I hope she'll be able to join us shortly. We have Professor Abosede George from Barnard College, Professor Lisa Lindsay from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Dr. Omoayena Odumbaku from UN Habitat. Just to give a bit of a background, what is invisible labor? The academic definition of invisible labor is that it refers to unpaid work that goes unnoticed, unacknowledged, and is unregulated. Invisible labor often impacts a wide range of marginalized groups, and women are disproportionately affected. And that is because in recent times, invisible work equates household maintenance and child-rearing activities for which women in the gendered role are primarily responsible for. In the last 2 years, in the wake of COVID and the lockdown, we have seen this play out very strongly, whereby fewer women are publishing, fewer women are able to do their intellectual activities, primarily because they are overburdened with household chores, with childcare responsibilities, and are simply burning out. A study by the United Nations says that out of every 4 hours of unpaid work, women do 3. And that tells us that we have an emergency on our hands. But how does this play out in the academic sphere? I'll be inviting our discussants to speak on three key questions. The first is, what has been your experience with invisible labor in the workplace and at home? What are the opportunities available for female early career researchers to overcome these challenges and to prevent potential burnout? And the third one is, how can we support women? I'll start off quickly with Abosede to share a few reflections on this, and then we'll have an audience interaction. My name is Taibat Lawansin, and I'm from the University of Lagos. So over to you, Abosede.
Thank you, Professor Lawansin. It's nice to see everyone again and have our annual reunion. And I want to greet all the mentors that are here and also all the mentees. It's always good to reconnect with the rising scholars or younger scholars. Okay, so the question was about invisible labor. Thank you so much for providing that definition at the beginning so that we all have we're all on the same page of what invisible labor is. And I really appreciated you talking about what the most common form of invisible labor that most people would be familiar with, which has to do with care work within the domestic space, care work within the household, whether for children or whether for elders sometimes, or whether for people who are sick or have disabilities in the families. And in many of our societies, obviously that work falls to people. It doesn't fall to institutions, right, or to social services, but to individuals. But what would that look like in a kind of academic, professional setting? The first thing that came to mind for me is actually a form of invisible labor that I embrace personally, but I also understand the cost of, not just to me, but to anybody who engages in this kind of labor. And that I think we should begin to think about, not even begin, this is not the first time it's been said, but we should think about how this kind of labor can be valued differently. And this is the labor of mentoring, or doing any kind of advising on campus. At my campus, we have an advising program. Faculty are requested to volunteer to advise, even though all students are guaranteed an advisor. So you can think about, how do those things add up? And yet advising, probably in terms of your professional advancement, is the least valued of the multiple things that you're expected to do as a researcher. The most valued is your research and evidence of research publications. The second most valued is your teaching, because that is the business of the university. And the third most valued would be things like advising, which are almost seen as extracurricular. And you can think about mentoring as an extension of advising. So this is a labor. I don't quite go to the extent of saying it's totally invisible, but in some places it is very invisible. But it's a form of labor that I'm very interested in, that I find very valuable, that I have benefited from personally, that I know the necessity of as a scholar in the academy. I absolutely believe in it. But the question is, how can it be more than invisible labor? How can it be more than undervalued labor? How can it be as serious as research and teaching? So I think that's where I will start, and maybe I'll hand over to someone else. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Abosede. How can mentoring be more than invisible labor? I think, we pour our hearts and minds into supporting those who are coming behind, and how does the value begin to make sense? So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this mentoring program, and I appreciate the definition of invisible labor that came at the beginning. And also, Abosede George is talking about the work of mentoring and how important that is, and in fact, and yet not valued enough by our universities. I was tempted to begin by talking about my own experience of doing invisible labor, but I think perhaps it might be more distinctive if I actually put on my hat as a department chair and confess that I often ask for invisible labor from my colleagues. And so I want to share a little bit about why administrators and department chairs and people who are in a position to ask do that. In my role as department chair, I have to staff committees for my department or sometimes for the university. And no one wants to create a committee composed entirely of white men, because we know what kind of blind spots such a committee might have. And yet, because of legacies of American and European institutions in the United States and in Western Europe, most faculty members are white men. And so if you want to have people who are not white men doing any of the behind the scenes work of trying to change the institution or running the institution, you have to have those people, women and people of color, overrepresented in committees. And that's deeply exploitative of those people, because they get asked to do everything, to serve on every committee. And it can feel like way too much. And being one of those female people who was always asked to be on a committee, I have seen that side of it. But now that I'm a department chair, I also see the side where I don't want there to be committees composed entirely of white men. And so we have a structural problem. And the end result, I think, of the structural problem, if we can solve it, is to diversify the behind the scenes work that builds and sustains our academic institutions. And that will only be to the good. Our institutions need change, and they need reform, and they need fresh perspectives. But the way to do that often entails the potential of exploiting people, of exploiting those very people who we're trying to get the institution to open up to. And so I'm saying all of this partly to kind of lay bare the structural problem that many of us are falling into, but also to offer only one potential strategy. And that is that everyone paying attention to this webinar should speak up when they are asked to perform invisible labor. And everyone in this audience will no doubt at some point be asked to perform invisible labor. And so first, think to yourself, is this in the service of something that I care about, that I think is worth devoting my time to? But second, how can I be strategic about this? How can I perhaps use it as an occasion to ask for something in return, to express my needs, to make visible the constraints upon my time? I know, as I'm the chair of my history department, and I have some colleagues who, unfortunately, I keep asking for things, to be on committees. Can you please do this? Can you help with this hiring? And I realize that I turn to them too often, but on the other side of it, they now say to me, okay, I'll do that, but can you provide me some extra research funds? Can you help me schedule my classes at a time that I prefer? Or can you help me to sponsor some event? And so they turn around and they use it as an opportunity to try to lighten their loads in some other way to make this possible. And so my suggestion to whoever is listening is, one, to try and understand why you may be asked to do lots of invisible labor. And second, speak up and don't just accept it without making clear what your concerns and needs are. And so I'll turn it over there, and welcome to Judy Byfield.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Yes, it's very noble to speak up, but how do you do it in an environment when the power dynamics are skewed? I think that's really the million-dollar question that all of us have to think through. So I'll just welcome Professor Byfield now. We've started the conversation on invisible labor, and the question is, what has been your own experience with invisible labor? And then the follow-on question is, how can we support female early career researchers to advance their careers in spite of it, and also to prevent burnout? So over to you.
Hi, I'm so sorry for being late. It actually is partly due to invisible labor. Because part of the question that went out before was, it's the institution, but also family. And my mom is actually in the hospital. And so they live in New York City, and I'm, 5 hours away in Ithaca. So I was down there this weekend, and my father's in a nursing home. So I'm going back and forth between the nursing home and the hospital. I drove back yesterday. And so today I am just exhausted. But, I'm what they talk about as that sandwich generation, where, it's, the parents, and I'm so thankful that my parents are still here, and I've had them so long in my life. My dad's 94 and my mom is 91, but this is that other part of life that you want to do well, but you want to do well, but it's on top of everything else. And so you're struggling to keep everything going. The invisible labor, as Lisa said before, for faculty, for women and faculty of color, you're getting it from so many sides. So it's the colleagues who are kind and generous, but don't understand the experiences you are having in the classroom, and why, sometimes they can say something to students that students will accept. And yet when you make a similar demand, the students are like, why? And so then you wonder, is it race? Is it gender? Is it both? You also care about students. I take my position as a teacher very seriously, and I want my students to do well. And so I spend a lot of time also with them outside of class. I tell myself every year, I'm not going to change my syllabus, but then, you're constantly looking out for, and you're not even necessarily conscious that you're looking out for things, but you hear about a film, you see a commercial, or you hear about a book, and next thing you know, you start tweaking the syllabus. And so then, of course, the knockoff from that is that it has to be reflected in the lecture that you had written perfectly well for last year's syllabus. So, there's that stuff. And then, there are the students who are going through their own crises. This past period of COVID has been really hard. I've had, and it's not unique here, but grandparents have died, fathers and mothers have died. I've had students who had to work full time because parents had gotten laid off. And so the only time they could meet was on a Saturday. So it's like there was no end to the work week. And because you want students to thrive, I find I do spend probably too much time with my students, but I also recognize that there are times when the issues that are confounding them are way above my pay grade. And so I am very good friends with the people over in student counseling. We unfortunately had a suicide this semester, and it was a young woman from Tanzania who had been very, very active in the Caribbean Students Association, in actually the Nigerian Students Association. She was involved in the fashion show. Most of the Black students in both my classes knew her. So how I learned it had happened was because I started getting emails from students saying, I'm so upset, I'm distracted. And so, then as I got all of these different emails, I said, no, don't worry about class right now. You have to focus on your own mental health right now. And I would talk to them. And then I called up the counseling office and I was like, they're holding these events. I hope somebody's going to be there to tell them, exactly what services you offer. So, the person I spoke to wasn't the person who was going to be directly involved with the students. So then the person involved with the students called me. So again, in an effort to try to take care of my students, I was also creating more work for myself. There's a part of me that's just not sure how you resolve all of this, because the needs around us are so large. They're large for, our junior faculty. They're large, some of my colleagues are in the same position with their elderly parents and are running back and forth from home to Ithaca. In our departments, not only had they been predominantly male and white, you also have people who really should not be around other people. And so, people whose social skills are problematic. And so I was associate chair this semester. And so, Lisa, I've been having these same conversations you've been having. The chair and I were meeting every week to discuss some of these things and who could be asked to do certain things, who couldn't be asked. And, there are those people that you don't give them free rein around the grad students, because they will completely wreck whatever sense of confidence they have that is so important for surviving and thriving in graduate school. There are, there are other people who are more overwhelmed than you. So you try to take that into consideration as well. So it does mean, I think, as Lisa said, as much as possible to speak out, and not always, and in ways that sometimes put your colleagues on notice that this work has to be done. And sometimes it may require that you get the skills you need in order to do the work so that you can be a contributing member of the faculty. It's not enough that we have a handful of people who are reliable and competent. In fact, I've been joking with my sister, who's now the director of a center. Competency will get you every time. If you show you are competent and sane and organized, that's it. The requests never stop. They come in from all quarters. So at the same time, those are such important and valuable skills. You start realizing that not everybody has those skills. Not everyone is invested in actually having those skills. And they sometimes are difficult precisely because it gets them out of things. People won't ask them to work on as many committees if they are going to be the person who just sucks the air out of the room and contributes nothing constructive. And so sometimes, yeah, we have to call them on that and say, no, these deficiencies can be addressed. And you have to sometimes push the administration to not accept these as excuses for not allowing, for people to not do the work of the department, because we're not just teaching, we are members of departments that require administrative work. And everybody has to chip in. And maybe that should also be a part of, when we're doing searches, think about, can these people work collaboratively with other people? Does this person have an investment in their colleagues as well as their students? If they're looking to be, in a place by themselves and just only focus on themselves and their careers, then maybe you should find an institution that can give you your own department. But if you're going to be part of our department, you doing the work you need to do is how you support the other people in your department as well. It's not enough to just say to your Black colleagues, yes, we support having you here. We are against the racist, sexist, homophobic practices of these institutions, and then they disappear. And you are left on every committee with the students thinking you're the one person they can talk to or the one of three people they can talk to. So there has to be some of that pushback on our part too. And we're not saying this work is easy, but it is patently unfair for there to be the usual suspects in the department that everybody goes to for everything. So if I sound like I'm ranting, maybe I am. They did ask me about being chair for next year, and I said, no. Being associate chair is like seeing the sausage get made. I'm fine. Although I did agree to be associate chair again in the following year. I have a sabbatical next year and I am working so hard to protect it.
Yeah, so it's really valid, because what we say here is the reward for work is more work. That's the Nigerian balance. And, then the person who has good intentions and is hardworking gets piled on and eventually burns out. Thank you very much, Judith. I'm going to invite Omayena Odumbaku to speak. She was in the, she started off in the University of Lagos as an early career researcher and transited shortly after after a few years, and she's now in the intense international development space. As she started off very young, and I'm sure she's had her fair share of, invisible work. So, Omo, the floor is yours. What has been your experience? And then looking back, how can younger colleagues, navigate this space in their, as researchers and as in professional life? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lawanson. Thank you, other speakers. Really happy to be here. I think this is part of my invisible work. I ran into my children actually to me to the study, and there's a limit to how much I can push them away, or else she'll be screaming. So, like Lawanson said, yes, I started as a young lecturer. I will say that I have a long list of examples, but I'll limit them to 2 or 3. The first one was as a young researcher, and this might be synonymous with us down Global South. You have your research or you do a term paper, a professor picks it up, thinks it's nice enough to be published. You are not recognized. So in the value chain of that research, you're losing traction. For example, you have maybe Lawanson and these are just examples, and Odumbaku, and maybe somebody called Adegoke was involved. I'm using us because, we could. And Adegoke is not listed. So when they're looking for researchers or professionals, then Adegoke's name doesn't come up. And this happens mostly to women because we really can speak up and we have so many reasons. So that happened to me quite a lot, not quite a few times. And I must say that the solution to that is mentorship. Because I had, the right mentor who I would speak to very often, and she'd be like, that's not acceptable, and we challenge the status quo. That's what we used to call it. We have to challenge the status quo to make a difference because we have to protect those coming in. And we used to crack jokes like sustainability starts with us, trying to, so that's one that happens very often. The other one that happens also in the professional circle is the idea draining. So you have an idea, you are in a team, and by the time they run with the idea, you are not acknowledged for the idea. Of course, it's good to be innovative. You see the idea coming into something that has come to fruition, but you're wondering, this started, with me. And so those are the kind of invisible work. And lastly, the home front. In as much as we have, COVID was one of the very litmus tests, especially for me, who I thought it was normal. I think with COVID, I realized that, no, this is truly, and I'm happy that we're discussing this so that younger people can actually take a cue from it, that it is okay to be up and about, it's okay to be brilliant, it's okay to be, but for what is the trend and for how long? And we have to define, please excuse me. Sorry. So with COVID, and I think for me, my COVID experience was quite different. I was trying to write a research paper. I was doing my job at the UN because my heart is in the academia. And I always tell Professor Lawanson that I'm coming back sooner than anybody can think. So, and COVID struck. And so I had to become a nanny to my child who was born in Canada, without help. Then I realized that, we're doing a lot of invisible labor, like you say. So I was the nanny, I was the chef, I was the cleaner, I had to wash the plates. And what am I trying to say? It hampered my output a lot. So if I was to deliver like 5 outputs, I could only do 1. And you cannot imagine if we do this day to day. So those have been my experiences, in my career as a young professional. And more than ever before, I'm a champion of breaking the glass ceiling, shattering the glass ceiling. And the most important is for the women to believe in themselves. A lot of us don't believe in themselves. We need that voice to tell us you can do it. So I will use the opportunity to encourage more women, to be that woman, that you want that other woman to be, the one you're looking up to and the one you want to be looked up to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omo. I'm not the members in the audience are unable to speak, so please, we welcome your comments and your questions in the chat box. I'll be visiting it from time to time. What you guys have spoken about brings me back to the issue of mentorship, especially with regards to women. We've seen that particularly, for women, I'm not sure mentorship is enough, because we find that men mentoring other men are more intentional, are more active about pushing them. So men go beyond mentorship to sponsorship. And it takes me back to what Oma was saying about how, her ideas are being stolen or appropriated, and recognition and acknowledgement is not given. And I think it's important that we move beyond mentorship to actual sponsoring those, particularly the early career researchers that are coming behind us, and pushing them into the limelight to get acknowledged and recognized for their work. It is a challenge, at least in Nigeria, where younger researchers are not adequately recognized or acknowledged or even supported along their career journeys. And I think it's particularly stronger with women. We find that in a conference, for example, the female lecturers are more likely to be made chairman of the welfare committee, in charge of meals and things like that. Whereas the male, are in the forefront, handling affairs and things like that. It calls to question how some of these gender biases come into the academy and subliminally just continue to downplay the role and the value that women bring into the system. So I'm going to go around the room again, starting with Abosede to, what are your thoughts about this and how can we sponsor women? Over to you, Abosede.
Thank you so much. This conversation of I guess what you're picking up on is also has to do with Alma's earlier comment of breaking the status quo. Like there's a way of doing things. There are these habits and practices that become sedimented, and how do we break out of that? Even women faculty who are, on board with change, but may inadvertently be reinforcing the status quo. It reminds me of the first LSA conference that we had in Lagos, and I was in residence at the time because I was on leave, and so I was able to just be in Lagos, and we were collaborating with colleagues, and I remember we had a big fight. Not a big fight. Oh, so let's say we had a back and forth. I won't exaggerate. We had a back and forth on the organizing committee about ushers. And I think this is a bit connected to the different academic cultures. So ushers, for anybody who's not in Nigerian university system, are usually students, younger students who help with conferences, the logistics, they help with logistics, running errands, things like that. They're kind of like informal staff. And generally, what I came to understand was generally that they were young women, and that there was this idea that they were like pretty young women, right? That there was something about your looks that was also somehow a qualification, a requirement for being an usher, which to me just sounded like at an academic conference, at a university context, for any position to be attached to your appearance, especially like your desirability as like a young woman, was so problematic on so many levels, just asking for trouble in so many ways. And also a very, to me, a confounding message to be sending to young women. We're trying to bring them in as researchers, not as accessories. So So what we had the back and forth because I was like, we're not going forth with this. This doesn't make any, it's not happening. And we were just like going back and forth. People were trying to explain it to me, like explain it away. And I was like, there's no explanation you can give me that will make sense of having this particular gendered, young person's role in an academic conference that is committed to cross-generational collaboration, transnational collaboration that is committed to collaboration on different levels, many different levels. There's no way, this makes no sense. And I guess it comes back to what a couple of speakers have already said. You just have to, those opportunities will always present themselves because the status quo is invested in reproducing itself. And so you will always have an opportunity to speak up and say, we're not doing this. You guys can call me whatever you want, say whatever you want about me, but I'm not supporting this. That's just one example that I'm thinking of. But there are many opportunities. I think forums like this, some of the stories that Professor Byfield shared, almost baby, who jumped in on the webinar, also kind of piped in her own little voice, and also that are going on in the chat that Bright is sharing, it make me think that oftentimes invisible labor is what makes all the other labor possible. I think generally, the invisible labor of arriving to work on time, like everything that goes into that. When I was a student, here's the last story, I don't want to go on too long. When I was an undergraduate student, I was a student here in the US, in New Jersey. I was newly learning about African history. I had a professor who really inspired me. And I would love the topic. Like, I would get the book list at the end of the summer. I would go through half of it before the semester even started. I didn't know what I was reading, but I was just like, oh, this is so exciting. I was just loving it. But during the semester, I had to work. I think I had a waitressing job, and I had to work just because of the way my finances were structured. I had enough to get tuition to start the semester, but to pay for month to month, like housing, my books, all of that, I had to work and pay for that as I go. So she had a class that was, I don't know if it was in the morning or sometimes she would show a film, so the room would be dark. And whatever the circumstances were, I was always falling asleep. And as I already said, I was super excited about this topic. This is not because I was disinterested in the topic. I was just tired. I was exhausted. And the class came at a time when I was crashing. So I was always falling asleep. She would always call me out in class. She'd be like, do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go get some water? She would always kind of call me out in class. I was a little bit embarrassed, but it did help to go and get some water. It did help to go for a walk and then come back to the class. In some ways, that was a way of recognizing that, something's going on with this student, just let them get some air, get some water, come back, So that was very humane. I think that one way of addressing the costs of invisible labor that we see around us is to try to be a little more humane. The professional world, I feel, tries to turn people into kind of professional robots, but we all have lives outside of our jobs. And then eventually the professor, she had a meeting with me and she was like, we have to have a meeting. We have to discuss your behavior in my class, this and that. And I just, I just kind of explained what was going on. And then after that, she had an understanding, after that, it was like, sometimes I fell asleep in class, but it would be for a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and then I'd wake up and I'd be back in. And I still got, high marks in the class because I love the topic. That's why I was there. So I think, maybe one of the ways that we can short circuit the status quo is to, dare to, especially for those of us who are more senior, who are tenured, who are less vulnerable to reprisals in the system, but it's to dare to like institute a different kind of professional culture, one where people have a life, you don't make meetings at times when you know that people have things that are pressing to do, in their personal life. Don't if a student seems to be in some kind of crisis, maybe ask what's going on before making a determination about how to dispose of the student, just, I think there are many other things I'm thinking about, but that's from the standpoint of where I am right now. I'm not a chair of a department. I understand that the chairs need to staff the committees, but are all the committees truly necessary? I mean, that's a little question too.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, but we get overwhelmed with these committees, really. Sometimes an email will do. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on something Abosede George just said at the beginning of her remarks, where she suggested that invisible labor is what makes the more visible labor of academic institutions possible. And I think that's absolutely right. And it reminds me, here I'm going to get professorial for a moment. I mean, it reminds me of what Marx and Engels said about the social reproduction of labor. That the social reproduction of labor, the cooking and cleaning and preparing food and all of that stuff that was typically done by women in the European past, is what made men's wage labor possible. And so it was kind of the basic underpinning of capitalism. And we can make an analogous argument, I think, about universities, that the unpaid, invisible work that so many people are asked to do is what makes the highly visible, more glamorous things function. And that, like the social reproduction of labor in the history of capitalism, it tends to be gendered. It tends to be more often women, more often people of color, more often junior people. I apologize, there's noise outside my window. I hope you can still hear me. But so that's me pontificating about this for a minute. But I also want to pick up another suggestion. Sorry, street noise. And another suggestion that came from I think all of the other panelists before me, that we need to push back against our colleagues who don't want to participate in invisible labor. The ones Judy Byfield was talking about, who are too incompetent or too unpleasant or not good at service or not good with students or whatever. And so they get out of doing these things. And so all the burdens then fall on those who are competent. And I completely agree that we need to push those people to pull their weight. And we can't just have committees that are staffed by women and people of color, because those are the people who will do it. And those are the people who are competent. Everyone needs to pull their weight. And so part of the task, I think, of people who want to change the institutional culture is not only to push those who don't often do the invisible labor to do it, but to educate them about how to do it and why it's important and what can be their point of entry into it. Not all of them are ill-meaning, some of them are well-meaning, but but perhaps ignorant or perhaps uninformed, and need to kind of be led into this. And as an example, I'll tell a very old story from my early professional life. And that is when I first started in my current job, I had just had a baby. I mean, just had a baby. He was 2 months old. And at the time, my department was very, very male, very, very senior. There were a few women, there still are a few women, unfortunately. And there was no one else with a young child in my department. And I was hired, my start date was July 1st. And even before classes started, I was summoned to a meeting of some committee at the university. And I hadn't even organized any childcare yet. There was no maternity leave because I was starting a new job. So I said, okay, I can come to this meeting, but I have to bring my baby. And he was 2 months old. 2-month-old babies don't really make any noise anyway. Sorry, I'll be bringing my baby. And the senior man colleague who had called the meeting acted like I had said I was going to bring a suckling pig to the meeting or so. I mean, he was just utterly flabbergasted. You know, what? Okay, I guess. I mean, it just acted like it was the craziest thing ever. And I did it, and it moved. And fast forward 2 years, and we were at an end of the year picnic. And at the edge of the picnic, I was standing at the edge of the picnic watching my then 2-year-old toddler play in the grass. And so I was sort of partially participating in the faculty picnic and partly watching my son. And this senior man came over to me and stood with me and watched my son. And he said, I'm really sorry I treated you that way. I didn't understand. He said, I now have a daughter who has just finished her PhD and is starting a new job and has a child. And I hear from her what the pressures are and how difficult it is to manage childcare and academic work and blah, 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 blah. And he said, and I really was not very supportive to you. And he apologized. And I felt like that was a small little moment that pointed out that, you know, these senior colleagues who we sometimes dismiss as set in their ways, or, you know, they don't understand, they can be educated. They can have their eyes open to things, sometimes because just they have not experienced it in their own lives, or they haven't had someone explain it to them in ways that they can relate to. And so that's my little plea, I guess, echoing Judy Byfield earlier, saying we have to drag these other non-cooperative academic community members into participating in service. But I think we can also educate them and open their eyes, or at least I hope we can.
Yes, they have to do better, and we have to make them do better. So there's some comments and questions in the chat room. I'll invite the panelists to please respond to those, and then yield the floor to Judith now to share some comments.
Okay, so I'll go back to the point that you raised about sponsorship. And I do think that's a very important point, and it does look differently for, I think, the different disciplines. So in, you know, linguistics or sociology or psychology, certainly, where you are on papers as co-authors, that is less so the case in, I think, more of the humanities type fields. Still, I think that part of what we can assist junior faculty in doing is to really think through how the things they are invited to do assist them. So, you know, one of the things I encourage people to do, you know, they do on our annual reports and all that, they want to see that we have done presentations in different places, you've done conferences and all, but don't do everything that, you know, don't say yes to everything that's presented to you. does it really advance your work? Is it a topic that's going to help you wrap your mind around, an issue that is pertinent to the book you are ultimately the manuscript you're trying to revise, the dissertation you're trying to revise for publication? I, participate in opportunities that will allow you to talk about things that directly relate to your work. The other thing that I think people should really try to do as much as possible is to have their classes synchronize with the work that they're doing. And so, yes, depending on the school, sometimes you're going to be doing general survey classes, but even in the survey classes, you can incorporate some of the readings that help your own thinking and development. One of the things I used to do early on, and I actually still do to a certain extent, in what were effectively my senior seminars, if I agreed to review a book and I saw where it would work in a class, I would assign the book to the class. And so not only did it force me to, sit down and read it, but I had the benefit of the conversation with the students. And that helped me sometimes to really sharpen the critique that I wanted to make of that particular book. So I think in all of these ways, that's part of how we are helping our junior colleagues sort of stay focused on their work and getting their work out. While it's nice on some hand to be running from this conference to that conference or another, if it's not supporting your work, then it's ultimately working against you, because the timelines are short. When you come out, you have your dissertation and they say your tenure is in 6 years. And yes, this is our, the system in North America here. Well, the first 2 years, you're probably going to be overwhelmed from teaching. Or if you're like Lisa and you have a young family, that alone could be a full-time job, but you're doing that in addition to the teaching and then trying to do the revisions on the book and, getting the contract. So I think the more you can, in a sense, sort of decide, okay, this is how much work I think I have to do on the book. This is when I need to have it done so I can get the book proposal in. Work, in a sense, that timeline around the center of your planning for everything else. I remember my sister is also a faculty person. She's a sociologist, but she came to academia as a second career. She'd been a journalist for years first. And so, I was sharing all this stuff with her. And as we were talking about when she was going to be coming up for tenure, I was like, that's her first son's senior year and in high school. So that was also the year he's going to be applying to college. So then we factored that into her timeline. So it's like, oh, I've got to get this done before that and this other stuff done before that, because I know senior year is going to be crazy. And it absolutely was. So as much as possible, I think sort of take that sort of long-term planning and think about what needs to be do when. And it may not work so well for everybody, but I'm one of these people who responds to timelines and deadlines. And I was sitting, I had the same dissertation advisor. And, she said, okay, if you're going to defend this, by spring of 93, I need a full draft of the dissertation 2 years before, and we worked out this incredible timeline, but it kept me guided, and and focus so that I actually stuck to those deadlines, and that's how I was able to get everything out. And so I do that now for myself, still as a matter of course. And it doesn't mean that everything happens the way you want it to happen or how you plan it, but I think the organization and putting yourself at the center of how you organize and prioritize your life is so important. If this is the career that you, something has happened with
I think
our
it's a
chat.
troll.
We have a
Somebody,
hacker in the
Yeah,
house.
yeah, you could
yeah,
take
Yeah.
them out.
yeah. So yeah, and so I think to the extent that we can help junior colleagues sort of do some of that and plan and stay focused and make everything else connect to the work that they are trying to do. That's an important part of, I think, that sponsoring that you were talking about.
Okay, thank you, Judith. The LSA admin, please, can you identify the hacker and remove him quickly? Thank you. Yeah, so there are comments in the chat. I think you spoke directly to the issues around maintaining the work-life balance. But there's this question from Otito Fon Eyang about particularly those the question about invisible labor that African or Black graduates perform as a token diversity figure in North American universities. Incidentally, the three of you are based in North America, so that will work. How can they navigate such environments and maintain work-life balance? And there's a related question from Pelumi Folajimi, speaking about, comments that Abosede made regarding we should be respectful of the students' time. And then he said, or she said, where there's no official working hours in the university, how can a student plan personal life to conform? So maybe we'll start with Abosede. How can a student maintain work-life balance, particularly if he has to fill in that diversity role and then navigate the fluid working system in the campus?
I'll take the first question that was directed to me directly. And, how can a student plan their personal life matters to conform with the university calendar? I think I think it's possible. That's what I'll say. Okay. Of all the kind of professional spaces, industries that one can be in, I think the academic clock, so to speak, is one of the most flexible, in my opinion. I think what I was advocating earlier was simply a more humane culture, of a more humane professional culture within the academy, where we understand that we are professionals. We want to show up on time. We want to be at the webinar on time. We want to be prepared. We want to be, we want to give a good lecture, as Professor Byfield was saying. We want to do well as professionals, but I think we also want to, as Lisa Lindsay was saying, we want to recognize that the people the professionals we are working with are also people, and they will have individual needs from time to time, and that the system will not fall apart if you accommodate someone's individual needs from time to time. So I wouldn't recommend making office appointments with a faculty member at 8 o'clock at night. That doesn't, never. But, if if, I don't know, let's say, I have had the experience where I had to reschedule a class. And let's say the class usually met 11 in the afternoon. For some reason, I had to reschedule it to like 4 or 5. And I could only do so by surveying the class. It was a smaller seminar, very intensive senior seminar. You survey the class, do a doodle. What time can everybody make it? Is everybody willing to reschedule so that we can have the discussion that we need to have? And the class agreed. And then so we all had, for that one special occasion, we had an evening seminar. You know, it was like, it started at 5 or 6. People were allowed to bring food. We had snacks. It was almost like, you know, a little bit of a special event, you know. This is not every time, but the point is, Palumi, that it is possible to be a professional and also to grant others a little bit more humanity and to expect a little bit of humanity too. And I think the first question was about from
Uchitofon.
Okay, Uchitofon Inyang. Yes, about being a token diversity figure. This is one of those times again where I think the first thing to do in that situation is to find it. If you're a junior person, if you're a student or a junior person, pre-tenure, anything like that, is to try to, hopefully you can find an advocate. Hopefully you can find someone who's senior that you can talk to about this situation. Maybe someone can, someone to say that, you know, I've been asked to do this, and that. You know, I'm pre-tenure, I have lectures to write, I have articles to write, and now I've been put on 4 committees. And I can't take it. It's just too much, right? And so hopefully a senior person would be able to, you know, advise you on how to get off these committees, you know. If you're in an institution, let's say you don't have anybody that you really see as an advocate. Frankly, I am of the the Malcolm X school, any means necessary. You have to do a pie chart of where your time goes. And if too much of your time is going to things that are not directly in your interest, then you want to reallocate this pie chart of where your time is going, then, you know, you might have to take any means necessary to get off of some of these diversity committees that you might be asked to be on. And any means necessary means any means necessary, honestly. I don't want to tell anybody to claim that they have a fever, but fevers come on at any moment, you never know. So I think this is the final thing I would say, that ideally all our institutions and all our colleagues and everyone would be considerate, would be thinking about your time, your timeline, what you need, and, you know, to get you to success. But really and truly, you are the only one thinking about that. Everyone's thinking about the little bit of your time that they need. Nobody has the whole picture. You're the only one who has the whole picture of your life, your career, and what you need. And so you need to make that personal pie chart for yourself about where the time is going and do what you need to do to allocate the time where it needs to go for you to achieve success.
Yeah, very well said. So over to you, Lisa.
Well, that previous comment reminds me of a friend and fellow academic who does a very good job of protecting his time. Of course, it's not someone with the same kinds of pressures that everybody in this webinar has, but his lesson is, for anyone else, perhaps a little too extreme, but I'll throw it out there anyway. He only lets himself prepare for class for the 2 hours before a class, and will only let himself prepare for a meeting in the 1 hour before the meeting. And he tries to maintain this discipline so that if class is tomorrow at 1 o'clock and it's today, he's working on his research today. And he will not start preparing for class until 11 o'clock tomorrow. For me, that's living a little too close to the edge. I don't know that I could handle the stress of that. But what it does is that it protects his research time, and he has realized that that is the thing that he is most committed to, and that's the thing that we get rewarded for the most, and it is a strategy for protecting that research time. I'm not necessarily promoting that because I don't think we should I don't think we serve our students very well if we're preparing at the last minute like my colleague does, but I echo the sentiment of, as they say in economics, pay yourself first. Invest for your retirement before you give money away or something like that, and pay yourself first. So allocate the time that you need for the things that you have determined are the most important. And if there's any time left over, then that can be what you make available for other needs.
Yeah. And Judith, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to support things that both Abosede and Lisa said. I mean, I really take to heart what you're saying, Abosede, about making the academic environment a more humane environment. And I think one of the examples that actually came out from your story about the class that you kept falling asleep in was that the professor sat down with you. And I think it's so important for us to do that sometimes, because our students, some students are raised with a sense of entitlement where they will come and tell you, well, this is going on and I'm not going to be here. And it's like, oh, all right. But then there are other students who, and I think very often women students, and again, students of color, tend to be the ones to not come to you to tell you that there's a lot going on right now and they are struggling. And so I literally will tell the students at the beginning of the semester, if you disappear, I am going to look for you. And if they don't show up in class a couple of times, I will send an email that says, well, I noticed I haven't seen you. I assume then that you're planning to drop the course. Well, don't forget to do the paperwork on time. And then I'll get this email, no, I'm not dropping the course. I really want to take the course. And I said, well, then we have to have a conversation. And that's when I'll find out if they have been slacking off, or if there's something going on. And then if something is going on, then we figure out what accommodations are necessary. Do they only entail accommodations on my part, or do I have to send them? Do they have to go see somebody else within the institution? I think a lot of our students don't necessarily realize the resources that are there. And sometimes I've had the parents call me and so I had a student one time who had a learning disability, but she knew she had something, but it was never diagnosed. And I said, no, we have people here to do that. And so after I told her, then she had the mom call me and I said, no, she needs to go see this office. They will test her, figure out what's going on. Our goal is, both in theory and practice, to create the conditions for her to do the best she can do. And so, but it does require that they have this information, and they're just, a lot of people just have not, been raised in circumstances where they were even made to feel that the schools were there to meet their needs rather than them being a guest at these institutions. And so that's why sometimes those conversations are so critical, because they themselves may not have the language for it. But, after you've been doing this for a few years, and you start to recognize certain patterns and things, and you know where to send them. And if sometimes it's that there's so much going on in their life that they're overwhelmed, sometimes it is best to take a semester off, to take that medical leave. And, as I told one student last semester, I would rather you take the 6-year plan than I have to come to your memorial service. So I'm sometimes very frank, but I think that did the trick, because that's when I learned that is what the advice that the college had been given her. And my input only helped her decide, okay, I need to do this. I don't want to see them struggle unnecessarily. And those little interventions can go a really long way. For UT Tufon, the thing with the diversity committees, again, even though the requests will come fast and furious, you have to decide which ones you want to participate in. The need is always going to, supersede the resources. And so there are going to be some opportunities where you want to be a part of those conversations, but, create for yourself sort of like a template. And so when I get asked to do a lot of things, sometimes, I have a go-to email where I say, oh, wow, this looks like such a great opportunity. And, under other circumstances, I really would love to join you. But right now, my schedule is so full that, I just can't do it. But I wish you all the best. Period. Send. And you have to start getting comfortable with saying no, but I always say no very, very nicely.
That is very important. Okay, Abosede.
I received one of those emails from Professor Byfield. So, and this is just proof that you can say no and nothing changes. There is no devastation, there is no fight, there is no nothing. I still got the thing that I needed from somewhere else, and she got her time and her peace of mind. And here we are again together. So I guess what I was thinking was, because of what Professor Byfield was just saying, those of us who are in the West, let's say in the West, we're interested in diversifying, bringing more people with us, bringing more people with us. You would feel, of course, you would naturally feel invested in doing this diversity work. It has a benefit to you in the long term. You are interested in diversity. You're not trying to be the only one. And you feel the desire or compulsion to do it. And I think that is the challenge of saying no. That is where the challenge of saying no really lies. It's not hard to say no to things you're not interested in and you just don't have time for. It is hard to say no to things that you are interested in, or to people that you do care about. Like anything that actually does resonate with you on a deep level, like figuring out how to say no to those things. Professor Byfield just gave us a very nice example, but figuring out for yourself, like, how can I let go even of things that I want, for now? My experiment that I've been experimenting with this leave year, because I've been trying to protect my time too, is to say, no, not right now. Something like that. You know, it's not no forever, but not right now. Right now, no, it's not possible. And you can come back to me next year, because why? The work will still be there next year. So that is another thing you can experiment with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just a perpetual juggling act of trying to do your best and ensuring that the balls don't fall, that no ball falls along the way. Unfortunately, because of the rude intervention, we are not able to have the guests or the attendees participate in this conversation, but we'll be rounding up now with some final reflections. I just wanted to just reiterate some of the key things we've discussed in the last 75 minutes thereabouts. The value of informal work is in mentorship, it's in helping to expand diversity circles, is in showing empathy, it's in helping to support capacity strengthening, and also helping to open up those opportunities to engage our students, those who are coming behind us, with the opportunities for support, particularly when they are feeling overwhelmed. And another thing that we need to do is to push back against deliberate acts of rejecting invisible work, particularly under the pretense of incompetence, of lack of time. We all wish there were more than 24 hours in a day, or we still make it work. So we have to speak up, push back, and insist that those who can do. So not taking excuses, particularly from colleagues. I think that's important. And then actively seeking to sponsor, going beyond mentorship and seeking to sponsor and opening up opportunities and ensuring that the values and contributions, particularly of the younger scholars, are acknowledged and compensated where necessary. And then I think it's important for us to also work towards restructuring the systems that sustain the invisible work. And I like the statement, invisible labor is what makes visible labor actually work. But it's important that we be strategic about it. As Lisa said, we make sure how can our own needs be met within, you know, that invisible work. And then also important to highlight the fact that administrative work in the academy is often invisible, so we need to be careful around that, and then learn to say no. Well, maybe not no, maybe not right now, as Abosede said. So we have 5 minutes until the end of this session. I'll just take 1 minute each for each of our panelists to share some final words, and then we can call it a day. So we start again with you, Abosede. No, we start with Judith, and then to Lindsay, and have Abosede have the final say. So over to you, Judith.
So one of the things I would say finally too is that your universe isn't only the university where you are, but being a part of your field is also important. So, you know, attending conferences and getting to know, you know, other scholars in your field in those spaces is also important. also working within organizations within our professional fields. And so, you know, Lisa and Abosede, we overlapped at institutions, in the archive. I remember having conversations with Lisa in Ibadan. And so, you know, we have learned, and you sort of come up together as, you know, sort of this expansive cohort of people in your field, you know, whose work overlap, and that's also important. And so sometimes we get just a little, you know, hyper focused on the institution where we are, but those connections outside can also help in doing some of this work too, and sustaining you and reminding you to stay focused, and why we need to see your book come out, or why you need to get your dissertation done. Because at the end of the day, it is more than just you who benefits from this. It's more than just that sort of very specific career goal. But it does take connections at the same time that you have to limit those connections. It's that balancing act.
Thank you very much, Judith. Lisa?
Well, I'm reminded that we are engaged in invisible labor right now. Participating in this panel, and the people who are watching this panel, we're all doing this in a certain way would fall under the category of invisible labor. And we're doing it because we believe it's important for one reason or another. And I would say the same thing in reference to that wonderful summary that Professor Lawenson gave just a few minutes ago of the ideas that have come out of this panel. And what struck me hearing the summary is all of the very good reasons that people engage in invisible labor, and all of the good work that and important work that it does. You know, I think part of why some of us became academics is not only to pursue our scholarship, but to try to change institutions and to engage in social change. And all of these things happen in part because of invisible labor. And so it's a good reminder that it's not just a matter of having your time exploited, although it may certainly feel like that sometimes, but that this is done for a purpose, and it's done for very good purposes. And so it brings us back to that point that we keep returning to over and over again. One must balance the perhaps noble causes and objectives against the constraints of one's own time and one's own mental health and one's own ability to sustain oneself. And everybody has to figure out how to manage that balance themselves. But it doesn't mean that invisible labor as a whole category has no value, because the fact that we're all doing it right this minute, I think, shows that it does have value.
Indeed. Thank you. Finally, Abosede.
I think I agree with everything that's been said. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Lawenson for all your sharing. And the last thing I would just say is I agree with Lisa in particular that invisible labor is paradoxically the part of the work that some of us love the most. You know, we want our institutions to be better. You know, we want to mentor younger students who are excited and bring them on and show them the tricks and, you know, the ropes. We want our families to be well. You know, we want our communities to be well. We want all of those things to be in place. And I think that, you know, to come back to something that was said earlier, we also have to be with the joke about sustainability, right? We want all of those things, but we also want it to be sustained over time. And that requires just strategizing about what you will do now, what you will do later, and remembering that there's always more to be done. and you don't have to do it all at once. So thank you.
And on that note, I would like to say a very, very big thank you to all our participants, to the panelists, to LSA for this fantastic platform. Hopefully next year, we will be convening in person. I'll just ask that you enjoy the rest of the day and the other sessions in the conference. So on this note, we'll say bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.